All right, we are live. Long time no stream.
Yeah,
I actually the
I'm on
last
a
stream I
new
did was
laptop,
right on. Yeah, the camera looks better.
but I
I'm
gotta,
in a
yeah,
I'm in a different location. Uh,
yeah.
I have this annoying light coming down and making me look like a ghost or something. But um,
You're gonna be
yeah, I
called
think
called to the light. At least you're going to the good place,
exactly. Yeah. I
like the
I
movie
think
Ghost. You don't have these shadows crawling out of the ground to drag you down.
true. Yeah, I think the last stream I
No
did
product
was
product placement here.
yeah, very
Little
good.
9% IPA.
It's a straight person beer. Yeah, the last stream
IPA
I
is the
did was
straight person beer.
yeah.
No umbrellas in it.
The last stream I did was with you, for the Christmas story or for Scrooge.
Mm. Yep. I
But it
I
looked
was really happy with that. I hope you were too. That
yeah, I
was
thought it was awesome.
not a lot of people in the chat for it, but um, I am still writing my version.
Very good.
Add some things to it every day, pretty much. Um, well, ideas just I know the core story and so many versions of it so well that ideas just flow very very automatically for adapting the story to the vegan message and to the idea of somebody like Scrooge who's um, become a troll to keep himself from feeling pain and yeah, needs to go through that experience of his past, present, and possible future to kind of become the better person that's already inside him, so to speak.
Rock and roll. I'll read
Um,
it. You should dude, make a movie. That'd be awesome.
oh yeah, I'm right.
Imagine you're
I'm writing a screenplay. Yeah, that's the plan.
nice.
see if see if somebody is willing and able to make it. Yeah, it's a screenplay, not prose.
Oh, nice. You can do an independent film, make it yourself.
Oh man, I
It'd be
don't
a
have
lot
the
of work for sure.
resources.
Yeah.
I gotta go back to my day job. I'm gonna be back in Korea pretty soon. Um, the documents arrived almost a week ago, so the visa process is underway.
How soon is soon? Like,
Less than a month.
oh, that's pretty soon.
It depends upon the government because they're gonna want me to be working there ASAP. So depends upon how quick the visa can get processed, and then my sister and niece kind of know that they're getting recorded. But they're whispering, but not really trying to avoid laughing. We might have a couple of dogs suddenly bark intensely.
Oh, for sure.
It's
Dude.
actually been a thunder and hailstorm today, and it stopped maybe 20 minutes ago, but it might very well start again. The hail was driving one of the dogs crazy.
Yeah, what weather does that to dogs? They just go like I guess it depends on the dog. Some dogs are chill with it, but so many dogs, weather just makes them go berserk.
Yeah, I wonder how much they're attuned to actual weather and they have instincts about how bad actual inclement weather can be, or whether it's like triggering, like thunder triggers the instinct of a huge animal, growling,
Yeah, maybe.
when it's just like hyper stimulation of that sort of thing. Probably the former. Um,
Well,
so you doing okay?
yeah, I'm doing good. I think this resurgence of live streams is cool. Like Carson just did one recently,
Hmm.
and now I'm doing one today. And then did you see Travis just posted a new video? Um, he was
No, haven't
responding.
seen that, but
Yeah, he did this response to was it capturing Christianity and his moral his like
mm,
3 arguments against moral subjectivism. Was that what it was called? But
okay.
yeah, it was
Yeah, I'd
good.
like to talk a lot more about meta ethics. I've been um, I've been reading some papers, more than I usually do, and following Lance Bush's blog. Um, when I briefly talked with Lance in a group chat, so much more I wish I could have said. I don't know if that. Can you hear any of this stuff in the background?
Not really. I mean, I can hear some stuff, but it's not like bothering.
Okay. Um, I might still. Let's do this anyway. Should still be fine.
But yeah, it's there's nothing like crazy going on in the background. Like you should be fine.
Okay, it might start though. Let's just make sure before we really get into a conversation. Um, is this upside down?
What are we? Are we setting up a mic or something like that? What's going on? Or
All right. Mic working?
say something real quick.
Saying something.
Okay, it's working, but it's really quiet.
How about now?
Uh, it's a it's about the same. Um, your mic's muted.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I can always move if it gets too loud, distracting. Um.
I-
So yeah, I was gonna say that I wanted to get into some more conversations about meta ethics, where I know the general distinctions, but I haven't been very familiar with the really nitty gritty of the arguments. Um, but I do really sympathize with the kind of stuff that Lance is often complaining about, what he calls normative entanglement, the idea that um, especially ordinary people, but even some professional philosophers uh, readily confuse the question of how how important a normative position is with whether it has realist truth to it. So they'll typically come up with examples like torturing a baby for fun is objectively wrong,
Yeah,
as to make their meta ethical, moral realist point, where the implication is that an anti-realist isn't going to have a very strong moral conviction that torturing babies for fun is wrong. So it's really a manipulative move, because there's nothing about anti-realism that implies that the individual couldn't have a very strong personal opposition to torturing babies, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and I have a lot of personal sympathy with that, because even though I think that there are good arguments for realism, um, I think the most plausible normative ethic is scalar consequentialism. So moral rightness and wrongness is on an infinite continuum, infinite in both directions. There's no limit to how much better you could be, how much good you could possibly do, and there's no limit to how much bad you could possibly do, um, with no categorical distinction. So no place for concepts like moral obligation, moral permissibility. So the kind of terms people use frequently, like, is it okay to do X, um, don't really make sense. Um, I agree very much with Alistair Norcross in his recent book on the topic called Morality by Degrees. He has this later chapter where he talks about how we can still kind of use the terms of obligation. We can still talk about, I don't think it's okay to do something like, eat meat, but but when we do that, we're not really talking about the underlying moral truth, which is scalar. We're using kind of like contextual, pragmatic, in a sense, like, is it in this context, like, would people ordinarily think that I would support it relative to contextually relevant alternatives or something like that, so we could use these terms pragmatically while still realizing that the moral truth is only a continuum where you can always do better, always do worse, and there's no baseline, as a lot of vegan advocates tend to say. No baseline in scalar consequentialism, but I sympathize with the anti-realist frustration that Lance has, because when you don't accept the reality of moral obligation, you get the same kind of thing, right? People in the vegan community often think that I have a weak position because I don't think there's any baseline. Well, actually, I have an incredibly strong position, and I would personally like to see many people going far above and beyond into effective advocacy, activism, donations, but I just don't think any point along that continuum can be reasonably called a baseline. So people will say, like, if you don't even think that there's a baseline that a person must never knowingly consume animal products, then you must not be a very strong vegan. It's the same kind of manipulation, the same kind of normative entanglement, because they're focusing on the fact that I'm going to say, there's no baseline, so eating 0 chickens a year is just relatively better than eating 1 chicken a year. Um, but by the same token, I'm saying that eating zero chickens and doing effective activism is relatively better than eating zero chickens and not doing effective activism. So, you know, so I'm not giving the same kind of license to people to stop at the personal non-consumption that the person who has a kind of baseline or threshold morality does. So, you know, really scalar consequentialism is neither stronger nor weaker, you know. It's just different. But I think it has a much better claim to truth. It doesn't produce the same kind of paradoxes that thinking there's a moral baseline produces. That was kind of long-winded. So I would kind of like to argue for limited moral realism with anti-realists, and also, you know, in a context where I can reassure them that I'm not going to use these kind of manipulative normative entanglement sorts of arguments to smear them. Does that make sense, Gerald?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, and you've talked about similar things in the past about scalar consequentialism and stuff like that.
You should
I
check
would
out
like to.
the book. I mean, it costs like $70 or something because it's an academic press book. But Alistair Norcross's book from 2020, it's called Morality by Degrees.
Morality by Degrees. Okay, I'll open up a new tab so I have it saved. But yeah, I mean, if you want to talk more about like uh, I guess like meta ethics and stuff like that, I would recommend talking to Travis about it for sure. What was it? Morality under um.
Let me see.
Yeah, what was it called? Morality under.
It's called Morality by Degrees. Unless
Oh,
I'm getting
morality
this up.
by degrees.
I didn't flip the. No, I was worried that I flipped the title and subtitle in my brain, which I often do. And this is a this is one way I very well might have done it, but it's called Morality by Degrees: Reasons Without Demands.
Gotcha.
So it's really up to date, and I think he's got the most coherent form of ethical consequentialism out there.
Interesting.
There's a lot of similar thinkers, but Norcross was one of the early ones to really issue the concept of moral obligation, and he summarizes it. He really makes a tight argument.
Well, cool, man.
And
Yeah, I'll look into it for sure.
I guess what I wanted to talk about today is, you know, it similarly touches upon the issue of like disingenuous arguments and words that are used to produce a false sense of purity and moral simplicity in a domain that's anything but pure or morally simple or causally simple. When it comes to aggression, violence, force in interpersonal conflict. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
introduce your thoughts or something like that
Um.
from what you heard previously.
Yeah. Well, so I guess there's this really like cringe thing that a lot of like people in politics will say, specifically libertarians. Um, they say like they'll be like, free speech absolutists or whatever, and they'll say like you can say whatever you want as long as it doesn't like hurt anybody else. And what they mean by hurt is like um a
Mhm.
physical hurt. Um, where it seems kind of silly to have like that just be like an like just some rule there when it's like obviously there's certain circumstances where like the non-physical is probably actually worse than the physical. Like a shove
That's
is
right.
not nearly as bad as like just like screaming slurs at somebody. Um,
Typically, yeah, for sort of most like neurotypical people. Um, yeah, so it goes to something that comes up all the time um, when we're talking about debates with more deontological thinkers, um, which is deviations from the natural language sense of a word. So if you think about just what hurt means in natural language, um, you have these prototypical cases of getting punched in the face or whatever, getting stabbed, uh, and then getting hit by somebody's car, and then in natural language, when you talk about something hurting somebody, the kind of extension from that prototype of hurt or harm is, as you said, into um, various forms of psychological harm, right? Hurt is something that it's a negative affective state, is painful, it sucks, it has intrinsic badness, many people would say. um, in an instrumental sense, hurt, kind of physical sense, hurt tends to be something that interferes with the sort of productive psychological processes of a particular moral patient, right? They can't like work as well, they can't think as well, they can't live their normal lives as well when they're in physical pain, and then by extension when they're in psychological pain, they're hurt. um, but the people trying to make this deontic interpretation of the non-aggression principle, they extend that prototype of getting punched in the face or stabbed or whatever in the direction of anything that involves non-consensual physical contact, um, which does not does not meet anything like the ordinary language use of words like pain or hurt or harm. You know, I talked with Carson long ago about somebody just comes up and taps you and then walks away, and you didn't want them to tap you on the shoulder. In ordinary language, we'd say that was weird, but that didn't hurt you at all, right?
yeah,
Unless you have some really unusual condition, some kind of PTSD or something, where you know tiny touches can cause you legitimate psychological harm. But for the vast majority of neurotypical and even most non-neurotypical people, um, the distinction between anything that doesn't involve non-consensual physical contact, and then anything that does involve any sort of non-consensual physical contact, that distinction is simply does not correspond to the harm non-harm distinction, or the degree of harm continuum. Right.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, part of me is kind of thinking about how we were talking about dogs earlier and weather, and like how um, it's like, you know, for some dogs at least, like they're obviously suffering. That they're afraid, they're running under the table, and they're but um, like um, it's like the libertarian like trying to say that like it's only bad once like the rain like hits the dog, like once the rain like physically affects the dog.
Maybe.
Um,
I mean, I guess
and
there can be moral badness to something that has no ability to choose or determine options. But if you were to go outside a house that has dogs inside and make artificial thunder and hail noises, I think the key thing that would matter is your knowledge about what the response of that particular dog would be.
yeah,
And if the dog was
um,
going to suffer, then you'd be doing something morally wrong. And if the dog had a different personality type where it didn't care or potentially enjoyed it, but that happens too, right? Dogs that just enjoy a new stimuli, then it wouldn't be morally wrong. Um, and in either case, would there be physical contact. Um, Talking about dogs is interesting because one of the things I'd like to say on this issue is I like to ask, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but just to get agreement, uh, is it possible? Is it logically possible that there is somebody with a mental illness such that, like, if you say certain words to them, they can't help but lash out physically, start punching.
yeah,
I
definitely,
think
yeah,
people have to admit, yes, number one, yes, that's of course possible, and it's in fact actual, right? Um, so then from there, it becomes an empirical question, whether and to what degree typical humans are closer to that sort of what we would call mentally ill person, or closer to the abstract conception of a rational being who can listen to any sort of speech, any sort of tone of voice, anything, and and resist responding physically, right? But once you grant that this empirical question about how many people fall at different points along this continuum, then it seems like um, you're already rejecting like a fundamental status for this theontic conception of the non-initiation of force principle. You're already granting that it's grounded in something else, which is the predictable consequences for the particular individual that's being interacted with. And then we can talk about the empirics. And I think the history of legal and moral conversations about fighting words is precisely that. It's an empirical conversation about how typical humans tend to work. It's is deeply grounded in common sense and ordinary experience. Um, is attempt to grapple with the reality of ordinary human psychology. Um, so I was doing a little bit of research, not a whole lot on the legal issue. Um, I definitely don't want to conflate moral rightness with legality. Um, Laws can and are wrong, um, especially not the legality of uh, one particular nation. The First Amendment, particularly in the USA, which is actually um, something of an aberration among the constitutions and the legal frameworks of the most morally developed nations of the world, right? Even Canada, which is so culturally similar to the US, doesn't really have the equivalent of the First Amendment. Um, so a lot of the questions of absolute protection for the most morally egregious public speech, like Ku Klux Klan parades, Holocaust denial, and things like that. A lot of the U.S. legal issues don't apply to really any other country in the same way, and I think we gotta start talking about that relationship with specific legal systems. We got to acknowledge that Germany, despite having strong speech restrictions against Holocaust denial or against praising Hitler or Nazism, Germany is not like a hellhole of totalitarian oppression of, of expression and debate. If somebody's gonna claim that, then I'm just gonna kind of default to the common sense. Modern Germany is not is not an example of pernicious intellectual oppression. Maybe Jeffrey's going to say that just claiming that makes me not a libertarian, but
Yeah.
obviously true. The modern Germany is a pretty good place for expression and debate and intellectual investigation and all those good things. Um,
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you react.
That's that's something I've also kind of noticed. I haven't done a deep dive into the legality and like the actual like law behind like the First Amendment and how it's treated in like the court system and stuff like that. But um yeah, it seems like like other countries that don't have the same like level of like free speech that we do don't seem to be like in like these like they don't seem to be in like this like hellhole authoritarian like crazy regime. Yeah.
That's not to say that I have a problem with the First Amendment. Just to say that the absence of it doesn't produce intellectual totalitarian oppression. Um,
Yeah.
and we have many proofs by example of that fact. Um, other nations of the world that are really good places to live and to think. Um, it still might be an improvement if they had some stronger protection like the First Amendment. So, deontic type thinkers, we talked about this many times. How they seem to have a personality type that values a sense of purity, exceptionless, faithfulness to moral rules. But then what often happens is when actual counterexamples arise, they make up new words, which often the claims that they make with these new words are pretty clearly false if the words are given their sort of natural language meaning. But when you don't think about them too critically, they help support this feeling of moral purity. In the case of speech restrictions, I was really surprised when I looked into the famous example of shouting fire in a crowded theater when there's no actual fire.
Yeah.
To find that the jurists who originally used this example, who were trying to describe why punishing that would not count as an invasion upon the fundamental right to free speech. They didn't say anything at all like what I would have said. So I kind of like to hear you say first, presuming that you agree that it's morally wrong to shout fire at a crowded theater when there's no fire. What's wrong about that, and why should that person potentially be punished?
Well, I mean, what's wrong with that is what's wrong with really any bad action, is just that there's the foreseeable consequences is that it wouldn't, decrease, at least from my perspective, right, decrease utility. People
Or
are gonna be
more specifically,
running.
how?
Well, I mean, it'll increase the suffering, right? Like people will be in chaos, run over people, and like it would, people would be, scared. It has a increased likelihood of causing injury, and um, yeah, I guess I could just go on and on.
But that would also happen if there was an actual fire. So then there's the other factor, right?
Yeah,
Which is that it serves no legitimate purpose. There's no
yeah,
upside
yeah. There's no
to shouting
upsides. Yeah,
fire when there's no actual fire.
I, I guess I mean, someone could get a little chuckle out of it for doing some sort of prank, but
Like trivial upside, right? The same as
yeah,
we often talk about with veganism, right? Trivial taste preference um, is a benefit. It's just many orders of magnitude smaller than the harm.
yeah,
Um, so what the jurists in these early Supreme Court rulings talking about that example said about it is basically that when people in that crowded theater hear the shouted word fire, their rational capacity and their conscience are bypassed, and they're compelled into action in a similar way to being compelled by physical force. I mean, I don't think I'm getting the language exactly correctly, but that was the implication. Like, shouting fire in a crowded theater causes people to causes people's bodies to act in a way that bypasses their conscious control. So it's almost like pushing them. What do you think about that?
Um, yeah, it seems, if you know those memes where you'll have, like, someone just, like, makes the very, like, obvious, like, simple statement, and, like, walks across the floor, and then, like,
Mhm.
the comparison is someone, like, trying to, like, make it super complicated, so, like, they have to, like, jump over this obstacle, then, like, go through this swing, and then, like
Yeah,
yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
yeah. When you're making up extra words and and you're making claims that are really factually dubious, um, in order to avoid just very simply appealing to expected consequences.
Yeah.
You have this super simple explanation. Yeah, you want to complexify it. It's so dubious that something like that actually exists in that example. People have no ability to react. It's like it's like a reflex, like when the doctor taps above your kneecap with the mallet and your lower leg rises. No, I don't think so.
Well, I mean, there is, like, an interesting conversation to be had with, like, determinism and stuff like that, um, when
Mhm.
it comes to moral choices and whether or not those actually exist and,
Oh, I'm a type
but
A physicalist. I'm not claiming there's some kind of free will involved. I'm just saying that information of the shouted word fire is passing through the brain, the linguistic uh, regions that can interpret what word it is, and then if a particular person happened to be deeply suicidal, then I think they might have the internal capacity to not instinctively run and just say, okay, here's my chance to die either by being trampled or being burned in the fire. So I'm talking about internal causality coming from the individual brains. I'm not talking about ability to violate deterministic laws or something like that. Um, I'm just saying that there's some extent to which re- responding to fire in a crowded theater is very similar to um, responding to racial slurs being hurled at you by somebody right in your face. Um, in terms of you can't, there's certain there's certain hormonal like neurotransmitter changes that are not under conscious control, but then there's also some conscious processing going on and they interact to produce the behavior. Um, and I mean the main point is just that the the way that these jurists seemed unwilling to accept an appeal to expected consequences, even when it's as clear as the fact that shouting fire in a crowded theater when you know that there's no fire um, has a large expectation of negative consequences with essentially nothing more than the most trivial of upsides and and some pranksters self-entertainment or something. Um, the fact that they couldn't accept that kind of very very straightforward, very obvious appeal, and they had to try to appeal to an analogy between speech and just a simple, physical interaction such as pushing. Um, I mean, that goes to the heart of the problem. Like, you want the purity of this absolute distinction that speech and physical contact are two radically different spheres of interaction, but then your response to an obvious counterexample, because the obvious wrongness of shouting fire in the crowded theater is an obvious counterexample to that simplistic binary distinction. Your response to it is to double down on the incorrectness of your initial distinction by pretending that the counterexample isn't really a counterexample, by making a dubious psychological claim like it just triggers people's instincts, and so causally it's no different from pushing them. You know what? It's just it's just the kind of thing that I find from deontic sorts of arguments all the time. It's like a lack of intellectual honesty and just embracing that the counterexample is a counterexample, and then explaining why it would reasonably be a counterexample in terms of its different expected utility. Uh,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you mentioned, you kind of like mentioned some examples earlier. Like I don't see like if they're trying to make that the reason for why like yelling fire in a crowded theater is is bad. Like what's the difference between like someone who's just like, you know, um angry at somebody who just says, you know, "What's up, bro?" Like, you know, um again, and then they're like triggering like a fight or flight response. Like
mhm.
it's like
Yeah, so the libertarians, there's, you know, I am a libertarian despite Jeffrey's claims.
you're fake.
Um, there's this other favorite line that the freedom, your freedom to swing your arm ends where my nose begins.
Yeah.
Um, it's such a violation of common sense to think that anything you could possibly do with your arms and the rest of your body, right up into the point where it contacts my nose, would be, morally, completely morally acceptable, right? More morally pure uh, form of interaction. It it violates common sense so strongly, but then it also, it has a lot of problems when it comes to scientifically literate accounting for evolutionary psychology, right?
Yeah.
Uh, if a much bigger man is angrily shouting, pounding the table, you know, waving his arms around, it means something very different to the much smaller man than it would mean if the much smaller man were doing the exact same thing in front of the much larger man. It's incredibly obvious why. I don't need to talk about specifics of evolutionary psychology, although I will, but it means something very different because we have very deep evolved parts of our brain that process the capacity of different people to inflict great physical harm upon others and the sort of Bayesian probability that they will, right? So when you are the much weaker party, you attune yourself more or less automatically to the state of aggression of the more powerful party. And that's true when you're a weaker or stronger man in an interaction. It's generally true between men and women. You know, I know it's not woke to say, it's not completely woke to say in some circles, but guess what? Men tend to be much physically stronger than women. So it's generally very true that a girlfriend has to be much more attuned to the state of anger and sort of physical excitability of her boyfriend long before any physical contact has transpired than the extent to which the boyfriend has to be aware of the girlfriend's state of agitation, right? That's just incredibly deep part of our brain. And then it's the same thing for adults versus children, and it's the same thing for individuals versus crowds or groups. You have to be more on guard about what kind of speech or what kind of non-contact involving like state of physical agitation is taking place if you are the outsider and then there's a group of like 4 or 5 people on the other side. Because we evolved to recognize the probability, the capacity and the probability of serious harm. Hindbrains are saying, you know, if it's just me and then there's like these 5 people that are angry at me, I've got to highly prioritize calming these 5 people down, right? So, and that's not the main reason, but I think it's a related reason why this movement called nonviolent communication and related movements, which Jeffrey really like incongruously he brought up nonviolent communication. Wow, he was trying to defend the point to me. He was trying to defend the argument that any kind of verbal interaction that didn't involve physical contact was acceptable, and any form of physical contact, no matter how little harm it caused, was unacceptable. So in other words, he was arguing against the concept of fighting words. And he brought up nonviolent communication. Nonviolent communication says virtually the opposite of that. Nonviolent communication in no way says that any amount of angry verbal interaction with slurs and and other insults is fine as long as there's no physical contact. What it says is, what nonviolent communication it says is that angry, escalating series of insults and verbal attacks are incredibly counterproductive toward understanding other people and making mutual progress. And so what we need to do is learn lots of techniques for stepping back from that instinct to insult and verbally attack one another, and instead think calmly about what has caused us to feel upset, what has make reasonable guesses about what has caused the other person to be upset, ask them explicitly what they're upset about, wait for their response, and then try to negotiate a change in behavior that will actually resolve that emotional um, hurt that both people are feeling. You know, so nonviolent communication says, we need to make sure that we have all kinds of tools so that we don't get to the fighting words, or we don't have to resort to the fighting words. It's almost exactly what I was saying and against what he was saying. So it's kind of crazy that he brought it up. Nonviolent communication is really, I'm not deeply like immersed in that culture, but from what I've seen of it, it is profoundly consequentialist. It's like a set of tools for getting a positive sum result, for changing interactions so that everybody benefits emotionally in terms of their needs being met.
Yeah. It also, I mean, it kind of like, what's it? Nonviolent conversationalism. I'm saying that right. Kind of implies violent conversationalism.
Right, that's right.
So, so
Yeah, sure. Linguistically, like the term wouldn't even make any sense if there wasn't a violent conversation was not a possible thing, right?
Jeffrey's bringing it up.
They wouldn't,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have termed it that. Yeah. It's like the exception proves the rule, right?
Yeah.
A lot of this is an aside, but a lot of science type people think that the expression the exception proves the rule is absurd. But that's because they're not understanding the proper context. First, they're not understanding that the word proof used to mean test, right? So that comes from a period of English where it actually means the exception tests the rule. That's why the alcohol concentration of a liquor is called proof, right? Because it's what it was tested as. But the other thing they're not understanding is that it's not, the expression is not supposed to be about science. It's supposed to be about language and law, right? So if you see a sign that says no parking Tuesdays, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., then you're logically going to infer that it's okay to park at on other days of the week and other times on Tuesday, right? So that's the kind of thing when somebody posts a rule and it's very specific, then it communicatively and pragmatically implies that uh, but the conditions outside of that specification don't fall under the same the same rules. So if somebody's going to say we encourage nonviolent communication, then clearly they're telling you that they believe that violent communication is something that exists and something that's significant, right? They're
Yeah,
not going to say
absolutely.
we believe in nonviolent communication if they think any and all verbal communication is nonviolent and only physical contact counts as violence. If that's what they thought, they would call themselves like non-physicalists or words only people or something like that, right?
Yeah. My
No,
I guess my
no contact communication. So I don't know. No touch communication or something like that.
yeah, for
So
sure.
example with Jeffrey, like that was about the weaker party like making the first physical contact. So the boyfriend who's like 6'6", 300 pounds, and a girlfriend who's like 5'2", 100 pounds, and they get in like a heated verbal argument, and then she like gets so upset that she like pushes him in the chest or grabs his shirt or something. And I was trying to ask Jeffrey, like, is that the initiation of violence? The first time that she non-consensually, physically contacts him, that's the violation of the initiation of force principle, or the non-aggression principle. That's the moment. Everything else that happened in their verbal exchange up until that point, it didn't constitute aggression. But then when she grabbed his shirt, that was the initiation of aggression. So now if he punches her in the face, that's self-defense. That's crazy. I'm quite
Yeah.
sure that Jeffrey doesn't believe that, but he was so gung ho and arguing against me and calling me not a real libertarian that he didn't even want to listen to what I was saying. The escalation, so to speak, from angry, insults, loud verbal argument between that boyfriend and girlfriend, which is not following the principles of nonviolent communication. The escalation from that to her grabbing his shirt is a tiny, trivial escalation compared with the escalation from her grabbing his shirt to him punching her in the face.
Yeah.
I mean, it follows from ethical consequentialism in terms of how much, real harm, how much increased suffering is going to take place. But it also just follows from the most basic common sense. The most basic common sense about human interaction. If you were observing two people, a couple, and you saw that, you would not think that the grabbing of the shirt was the primary escalation. You would think that the much more physically powerful person doing something that would potentially kill or very likely severely injure the much weaker person is the much greater escalation.
Definitely.
Do you mind my getting another drink here?
I'll
Take
go for
about
it.
20. Thanks.
I have not been reading these comments. Oh, nice. We got Phil in here rocking out. We got Travis. Oh, Contrarian left. Okay. Ooh, Travis. I don't know if you're still here, but yeah, I want to set something up with you and Jeremy on moral realism for sure. I think
I
we're.
hear you, dude.
Oh, you're back.
I hear you.
Nice.
Pour some wine here.
Oh, nice. Sounds good. I can't. I donated a plasma today, so I can't drink anything.
Jeremy looks like he's one bad day away from violence. I know my crooked glasses still haven't repaired. I've been wearing my sunglasses when I go out. I'll get them fixed in Korea. I look with my crooked glasses. I was just thinking I look like Michael Douglas in Falling Down. You know that movie, Jerome?
I am
You
not
don't know
aware.
anything about it?
Nope. Never even heard of it.
So, oh man.
Falling Down movie.
Basically, this guy who's just got laid off from his job as like a defense contractor gets stuck in traffic, and he just decides I'm not going to take this anymore, and he just like gets out of his car, and then it's in LA, and he's basically like this middle-aged like conservative white guy, right, in a suit. And as he like goes through the city, he basically gets into like increasing levels of interaction with dysfunctional elements of society that makes him angrier and angrier and crazier and crazier. And he ends up through like some early in the movie through like some accident, attacking these gang members, and then they try to pull a drive-by on him, but they crash their car, and they're all like severely injured. So he picks up their duffel bag full of guns and ammo. So now he's like wandering through the streets of LA, heavily armed. And it's kind of interesting because it goes back and forth between, or there's this progression between you're empathizing with this guy because everything around him and society is so fucked up, and then you're actually realizing that he doesn't know how to control himself, and he's actually got a really violent personality. So it's like this quintessential movie from the mid '90s about I guess society changing around the middle-aged white man, his conception of the kind of life that he deserves.
Well, it sounds right up my alley for sure.
Yeah, it's a fascinating movie, and then there's so much about it that's it's really good. It's really subtle. People's reactions to it are very interesting too.
It sounds like a taxi driver
It's
kind of
got
thing.
some similarities there. Yeah. Like tone wise is very, very different from Taxi Driver. I mean, part of the because like the ultimate level of violence is so much less. The way it's depicted is so much less. Um, And also, like in Taxi Driver, you think he has some serious mental illness, like schizophrenia, right? In
Yeah, he's got
Falling Down, you
something. You
seem
can
like you seem it seems more like choices that he's making, something that's less like mental illness and more like social dysfunction, right?
gotcha.
Like the dysfunction of that, middle aged white guy who thought he had a job that he would keep until retirement, thought it would be like it was a generation before or something, and isn't isn't emotionally adjusting to the changing reality.
Awesome, man. Yeah, sounds right up my alley. I'm like looking at like reviews right now. So yeah, I guess it came out in fall. I came out in 1993.
Mhm.
It wasn't even a thought back then.
Yeah.
But
Okay, so back on topic. Falling down is
yeah,
kind of on. It is kind of on topic.
yeah,
I
in
mean,
a
he
lot of
does
ways for sure.
early in the movie. He's trying to make a phone call at a payphone, and he doesn't have enough change, and so he goes to this Korean grocer. And first, the guy won't give him change because you need to be a customer. And so then he tries to buy a Coke so that he can get enough change for the phone call, but the Coke costs like 85 cents. So when he gets the change, it still won't be enough for the call. So ultimately, he ends up smashing up the guy's store because the prices are too high. So there's kind of relation between non-physical offense and then physical offense, right? And no, I do not agree with smashing up the products in somebody's store because the prices are too high.
We should go start smashing stores because inflation's too high.
Jeffrey was accusing me of, I mean, on both sides, right? Of things that I wasn't saying at all. That it would be ridiculous for anybody to say, especially as a consequentialist. Um, on the one hand, I'm not saying that it's a good idea for people to escalate into fistfights all the time when they're offended about some idea, um, or even any of the time. Um, there's two levels to it. One, uh, the kind of examples of speech or of sort of non-contact behavior that I think understandably often escalate into fistfights is very limited, right? It's not just like any time somebody's saying and expressing an idea that you don't agree with or really don't like. It's it's a much more direct and personal kind of um, fighting words that I think reasonably explain escalation into a physical fight. Um, but then besides the fact that those are limited circumstances, I also am not saying that the physical fight is the ideal response. you know, I'm not encouraging people to condition themselves to escalate into a physical fight whenever they have the chance. Quite the opposite. The best response is almost always de-escalation. It's just people who talk about fighting words, I think, almost always agree with that. You know, they just think that a certain level of fighting words, reasonably explains the physical response, not makes the physical response the best of all possible responses. Um, and then he also was trying to imply, and I can kind of understand why somebody would suspect this in our current climate. Um, Not suspect it of me. Somebody who knows me should not suspect this, but somebody, if they had just met me, um, might worry that people who talk about fighting words also think that having a political position that feels offensive to somebody's sexual identity or racial identity or political identity um, counts as violence. Um, I strongly disagree with that view. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I don't think that somebody should go and beat up Charles Murray when he's coming to give a talk on his belief that, there are group racial differences in average IQ. It's not at all it's not even close to the kind of thing that I consider fighting words that would ever justify a physical response. That's an intellectual conversation. It's prototypical example of an intellectual conversation. So, Antifa going and beating up people who are going to attend a Charles Murray lecture or Ayaan Hirsi Ali lecture or whatever, smashing windows. And that's not, that's not what I'm talking about. If somebody had just met me and suspected that I was like a far left Antifa sympathizer, then I could understand them having that kind of worry for a few seconds until I explained myself. But Jeffrey knew me enough not to make that mistake. And so, pretty pissed off that he wouldn't actually listen to what I was saying, and that he kept saying that I believe certain things literally 1 second after I had just said that I don't believe them.
Yeah, I guess it's one
Yeah.
of the classic parts of the online debate community for sure.
So so what are your thoughts on that? Like what's the, as a fellow consequentialist, how do you see the key differences between um, say a white guy going up to a black guy and and shouting a bunch of racial slurs at him versus like a white guy, say even like a self-described white supremacist giving a speech in the park about whatever white supremacists talk about, how all great achievements in history have come from white people, so, something like that, right? What would they think? Or I don't know.
Um,
But giving a speech that's not, it's not like directly confronting another individual, and it's not using slurs, but it is expressing the content of a belief that most of us would find extremely offensive.
so I think Possibly in the same way that like physical violence um is going to tend to cause more harm than like um non-physical violence, but that doesn't mean that like non-physical violence doesn't matter, and there are certain circumstances where it probably causes more violence than the physical. um I think it may also be true in this case too, where people can be maybe like um coerced into like causing harm. um so
Can we? What if we talk about talk about men and women in terms of evolutionary psychology? Typical um, evo psych analysis of power that connects up to a lot of anthropology, cultural anthropology. It talks about um, the women in a society being afraid of men physically harming them, which is obvious. And then men in the society primarily being concerned with women having um, verbal and social power that can result in a major downgrading of their status, and in hunter gatherer societies, ultimately possibly to the man being exiled, which is almost the same as a death sentence, right?
yeah.
um, and it's depicted, of course, in fiction. It's greatly depicted, right? The social influence of you know really intelligent, influential women, and raising certain others to power, and leading to the exile or death of others. Um, it seems strange to say from a modern kind of egalitarian perspective, an ethical consequentialist perspective. It seems strange to say all of that verbal politics and maybe treachery is okay. Um, it seems much more, what, morally advanced, civilized to say that we should all be behaving more pro-socially and altruistically, not um, not exclusively focusing on the physical aspects of antisocial behavior, but on all the aspects of antisocial behavior. You know? Especially, I'm a teacher too, so that plays a large role. Uh, I'm glad that teachers in Korea don't use corporal punishment on students anymore, except for maybe some really rural areas where some older teachers are still doing something like that. But in general, it's no longer acceptable. But by the same token, a parent or a teacher or another adult authority figure can very easily inflict immense psychological harm on a young child without any physical contact. Um,
Yeah.
and so I'm not going to draw my primary moral boundary, at a point that the point between all the physical stuff and all the verbal stuff, which implicitly treats uh, extreme examples of verbal child abuse as fundamentally okay. So it says it's not okay. It's one of the worst things that many people in American society or Korean society do is verbally abuse children, which causes long lasting harm.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I guess like it seems like a you know an some middle-aged guy just like um yelling like sexual slurs at some like kid is far worse than like someone just like pushing the kid physically. Um,
Yeah. So
yeah,
specific example, I was thinking, what are we gonna say? Um, so you got a couple in London. Ethnically, they look Middle Eastern. They look like they might come from a Muslim majority country. They're just walking down the street holding hands, and the woman is dressed what we would call like relatively conservatively, like normally for the UK in the summer. Okay, she's not like walking down the street in a thong, but she's just wearing like comfortable like top and shorts, right? And then this other ethnically similar looking guy walks by that couple and he says like whore. And then the boyfriend of that woman goes over and he says, "What did you say?" And he shoves the guy. Who started shit, Gerald?
the guy that said whore, he's the one that started stuff. Yeah.
A plus. That's what decent people with common sense would say. Not the boyfriend who made the first physical contact with a light push. Now, if somebody said whore to his girlfriend and he pulled out a gun and just shot the guy point blank, you'd say that the boyfriend was very seriously in the wrong, right?
Yeah.
But coming in and shoving somebody who out of the blue, not knowing anything about you and your girlfriend, called your girlfriend a whore because he's got these very backward cultural values. Um, no reasonable person is gonna blame the boyfriend. Now they might say, that it's kind of dangerous to go up and shove that guy. They might like advise the boyfriend to employ better tactics, but to call him the primary aggressor is just obvious bullshit.
Yeah. Um, one of my favorite things to bring up with this whole like physical versus non-physical violence and free speech and stuff like that is people like Charles Manson or uh what was it, the Jamestown or Jonestown massacre with the Kool-Aid? Um
Jonestown, yeah. Uh-huh.
Jonestown, okay, Jonestown, yeah.
Yeah, Jim
Where it's like
Jones, yeah.
where it's like um like we have like people like Charles Manson. It's like um if you want to be like technical, right? He didn't like physically murder anybody. At least not that we know of, right? But like he just all he did was just use his words and convince other people to murder people, right? Like he so it's like if we want to make this like physical non-physical distinction with violence, it's like what did like what the hell is wrong with Charles Manson?
Yeah, at the extreme end, yeah. I mean, at the extreme end, yeah, people would be excusing Charles Manson, but in practice, they do that the dishonest deontic thing, and they say like, but that wasn't just free speech. That was like a direct incitement. This is what I mean all the time by magic words. He wasn't using his free speech. He was directly inciting the physical violence. You know, like telling a hitman like, "I will pay you $1,000 after you kill this person. If you were to kill this person, I might pay you $1,000." They'll say they'll say that's still like this direct incitement of this physical violence. It's these words like that are um, they're an evasion of a counterexample. Those examples of Charlie Manson or the person who hires the hitman or whatever, that they're counterexamples to the deontic principle that there's this sharp boundary between words and physical interaction. And the reasonable response should be to embrace the counterexample and say that what makes it a counterexample is its consequences. Its expected consequence is massive harm to another person because of the effect that you reasonably expect those particular words to have. Consequentialism provides the honest explanation to all those examples, and making up magic words, where does it end? Then people just try to get more and more subtle about the technical form of communication that they're causing a death takes. So then the mafia boss invites this hitman to a really nice dinner, and then he doesn't even say anything. He just mentions, "Oh, so and so is getting ready to testify at the trial against our family. And then he goes off, changes the subject. But obviously the hitman knows that whoever the person was mentioned during this dinner with this high-ranking mafioso, that's the person that he wants dead. So, okay, the deontologist has to make up more magic words to explain what was so wrong about what that mafioso did. The consequentialist can just say, what's wrong is that mafioso knew that the death of this person is what he was causing. That's all you need to say, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to doubling down on your magic words to explain counterexample upon counterexample. The wrongness comes from the known effect, the intended effect of somebody's choice. And it's obviously no increased justification that mafioso learns to use more and more vague linguistic expressions to get what he wants, right? It's the fact that a death is what he wants that makes it bad, and that that he wants it, and that he knows that he will bring it about.
Yeah. I like how you use the term magic words for deontologists. I'm gonna steal that and start using that because it's yeah, that's definitely true. It's like they just yeah.
Um, which is weird. So I guess I kind of want to talk about the novel Mother Night.
Okay.
I really love Kurt Vonnegut. It's been a while since I read Mother Night. I take it you don't know anything about it.
Nothing. I'm looking it up right now. Mother Night.
Oh, in the preface to Mother Night, there's one of Vonnegut's most famous quotes, which is that we are what we pretend to be, so we must be very careful about what we pretend to be. But short summary of Mother Night. The narrator, he kind of brackets the story. He tells you that he's currently in an Israeli prison, charged with being a Nazi agent. And then through the story, you see he's actually been a double agent. So he's this English language propagandist for the Nazis, but he's really sending coded messages to the Allies the whole time. He's helping the Allied war effort.
Did you just spoil this book for me?
No.
Okay.
I mean, Vonnegut books, almost all Vonnegut books are told out of order. They're Pulp Fiction before Pulp Fiction.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So it's like the moments that come up that really matter. It's pretty much the main structure is told in advance, but the moral issue here is that he had this like deontic defense that he could have used, at least to spare his life, because he was doing what he was doing for the Allies, right? He was sending these coded messages, and that was the explanation for why he was giving all of these pro-Nazi speeches on the radio. But what he's realizing is that even though he has this explanation of what he was doing it for, he was officially, he was technically on the side of the Allies. he was so good at his propaganda that he realizes that he actually inspired many people um, to be pro-Nazi, violently anti-Semitic, right? It might not have been
Okay.
it might not have been what he was technically doing it for, but he was so good at it that he caused, massive harm, massive net harm. Um, so so even though that's the quote, we must be very careful about what we pretend to be. That wasn't quote unquote what he really was, but what he was pretending to be had the larger impact on the world, and so that's what he's morally culpable for.
Yeah, I mean it's that whole thing of if you what's the quote? If you dance with the devil, you don't you don't change the devil changes you. Something like that.
So I wanted to use that as an introduction to what people are morally culpable for by virtue of the ideology that they espouse.
Yeah, for sure. I like that example. That's a fun one. And that sounds like an interesting book too. Like I might check it out. I live across the street from a library, so I can just walk over to the library and
Well,
check it out.
insofar as I have a favorite novel, Slaughterhouse-Five is it. Um, Slaughterhouse-Five changed my life more than any other book. At least changed my life for the better more than any other book of more than any other novel for sure. Um, Vonnegut is really brilliant. Mother Night is
Came out in
one.
1969. Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it'd be cool to read Mother Night first. You don't really have to read his books in any order, but I highly recommend Slaughterhouse-Five. But I just this topic made me think about Mother Night a lot, and it's been probably 10 years since I read it, so gotta get back to it.
Yeah, for sure. Are you a big like rereader of books, or are you like a
Oh
read it
yeah,
once and set it
I
down?
mean, so I'm not a huge reader of fiction. Um, so yeah, when I do read fiction, it's often certain authors that are worth rereading. Um, I
Yeah.
reread Nabokov a lot. Lolita is an amazing, subtle novel that rewards many rereadings. Pale Fire is my favorite Nabokov. I've read it many times. Um, but I tend to like fairy tales, mythology, and stories that are told in many different versions. And it's part of why I love A Christmas Carol so much. All the different interpretations of it, some slightly different, some very different. You know the skeleton of the story, but then you see everybody's everybody's variation on that theme. I like it's a modern fairy tale, right? Um, I like uh, I like some comics like superheroes in terms of the different retellings of their origins. The origin story is always the best, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I, all the different versions of the the origin of the rivalry between Superman and Lex Luthor. It's much more interesting than any particular battle that the already established Superman and Luthor might have. The palimpsest, the the many interpretations of villain origin stories are the best part because they resemble a fairy tale or a myth. Um,
I like the villain origin stories better than the superhero origin stories. Yeah, they're fun.
um, so I'm giving you a big big reading list today. I wasn't really expecting to do that, but what do you think about the the moral responsibility of influential people expressing ideologies
Um,
like beyond Charlie Manson? Okay, like what's the responsibility of Karl Marx over the crimes of Stalin? Because Marx didn't do any of that shit in
yeah.
some direct sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, my intuition at least is just that like if there's a threshold, it should be a pretty high one um before we actually like come in and with like the law and stop them from uh
Mm-hmm.
sharing their ideas. Um like I'm very much I think that like being able to express really controversial views helps us move towards which views actually increase well-being in the world.
That makes sense. I have that view too. I have that view too. It was good that Marx and Engels could publish their ideas and participate in a public argument. Then, in retrospect, when you're assigning moral culpability, like who has more moral culpability? Uh, a low-level functionary of communist Poland who tortured one priest, or Karl Marx, who never personally tortured anyone, but probably played some causal role in um, the suffering of tens of millions. And I want to make it clear here that I just came up with this, but if anybody wants to say that the U.S. has done many similar things, I completely agree. I'm just sticking with this example for consistency of argument and consistency's sake, but I'm not I'm not trying to imply uh, that Marxism is the only set of ideas responsible for massive harm. Obviously, many ideologies that were popular in the U.S. led to enormous harm, and and colonialism from European powers and also from the U.S. caused immense harm. So I'm just using Karl Marx because he's a clear example of somebody who like didn't kill anybody, didn't torture anybody himself at all. He was just an intellectual. The only people that he sort of like directly harmed is probably like his wife from all the affairs he had or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the people he borrowed money from and couldn't pay back. But no, those are pretty trivial. So I'm just using him as an example of somebody who had a plausibly like very harmful um, set of ideas that successfully spread versus somebody who directly did something very evil, but only on a very small scale, so it couldn't possibly be more than all the harm that Marx caused. Maybe, I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
a better example of somebody that's just like an ideological racist versus some just poor white guy in a small town that killed one black man out of racism. Who's more culpable, the one who actually directly physically killed somebody, or the one who the lawyer or the politician who spread that racist ideology? If that makes it simpler, you could change it to that.
Yeah, like I mean, you can make the argument um that like the teachings of like Marx um caused more suffering than the one evil actor. Um but I think to a lot of people the one evil actor like it intuitively seems worse. Um and that's an interesting thing to think about. Like cuz I think the intuition isn't that like Marx was like in his, you know, some cave like twiddling his thumbs trying to figure out a way to destroy the world. Um
Mm-hmm.
like
He thought
he
he was
was
going to do enormous good, right?
yeah, he was going to end, you know, worker slavery and
Mhm.
you know, bring equality and help empower
Yeah, that's
the working class and
so. Mark seems like a good faith actor, right?
yeah.
Even if you think he was mistaken,
Yeah.
he should be judged by his expectation.
Um yeah, at least possibly. Yeah, I think that's one thing to look at. Um
Um,
or yeah.
so that's it. That's such a it's a. I mean, I agree in principle. This consequentialist distinction between expected consequences, sort of rationally expected consequences, and actual consequences. It requires you to psychologically analyze people, right? Because if you think that it's all about anticipated consequences, then, you know, if Joseph Goebbels really thought that if the Jews were allowed to exist, they would infect all the cultures of Europe with values that would destroy civilization, cause immense harm, to everybody. Um, you know what I'm saying, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the right. It's the
Did he
consequences.
really believe it? You know, was he just a power hungry guy who liked oppressing and killing innocent victims, or was he somebody who legitimately believed that the world was going to be vastly worse if he didn't pursue the Nazi Holocaust? And how do I know? How am I going to know that? How am I going to figure that out about the guy, right? I see the actual effect that he has and see that it was one of the most negative effects that any individual has had in history. But I don't have the tools to get inside the guy's mind and then see whether he was really thinking like a consequentialist and really wanted to do the best for the people of the world and just had very mistaken premises, right? Premises.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the consequences is what matters, right? So it's like, um, the only reason we care about someone's whether or not they have like evil intentions is whether or not um like it's because they're more likely to bring about better consequences, right? Like if someone has a belief that like you know an all knowing, all loving God wants everybody's like legs, and they're going around just chopping people's legs off
Mm-hmm.
because like
I
it's
was
for the
going to go
greater
to the
good.
hell point, you know. Yeah, that's because that's the next step beyond the Goebbels example is the people who believe in hell example.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. You can go all the way to hell for sure.
because it seems like we have a tendency to judge people whose beliefs are similar to our own in terms of expected consequences, and judge people whose beliefs are very different from our own in terms of actual consequences. So we don't judge Google's based upon what he believed would make a better or worse world for all. We judge him based upon what what we see as the objective consequences of his actions. When we judge him to be one of the most evil people in history, uh, and then a more extreme version of that is Christians who believe in eternal hellfire because we said this before, right? As a consequentialist, if somebody believed that by engaging in homosexual acts, you would burn in, you know,
Hellfire, yeah.
unimaginable torture, hellfire for eternity, and you would also be causing another person to suffer that same punishment and, spreading the sin that would cause more and more people to suffer that astronomical suffering, then it would be right. It would be the most important thing ever to try to stop that behavior. So we do in practice judge people who at least claim to have that kind of belief in terms of the actual consequences, given that no such hell exists. We judge them as horrible because they're inflicting lots and lots of suffering upon gay people for no reason. because we don't believe in that hell. We're not judging them upon their own personal expectation.
Yeah.
Unless we think they're lying, and it's plausible that they don't actually believe in that kind of hell, right?
They're just
It's
yeah.
possible that they're just bullshitting, and they really just selfishly are, they get grossed out when they see two men kissing or something like that. But they don't believe in hell, and that's just an excuse that they have.
Yeah, it's
That's
just the tool
plausible.
they use to enact their
And there's probably some people on
disgust.
both sides, right? There's probably a lot of people using like God is going to send people to hell as an excuse for their own selfish, like, social control. But then there's other people who literally believe in it. You can't always tell who is who easily. There's some people who have evil, selfish ethics, and then there's other people who have kind of plausible ethics premised on insane beliefs about the nature of reality. And it's not like they don't wear that distinction on their sleeve. So it's a tough process of sorting them out.
That's Phil posted an interesting comment. There is a strong parallel here between a faithful person who thinks the world is corrupt and a vegan who thinks the world is carrying out an endless animal holocaust.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, of course, to say there's a parallel doesn't mean that they're the same. The 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 vegan side of that comparison has vastly more empirical evidence on our side.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so in terms of the in terms of the reasonable um, Bayesian probability for those two beliefs, the vegan one is just many, many orders of magnitude higher. But in terms of the moral response to having such a belief, uh, I agree that there's a parallel. If you believed that hellfire awaited sinners, then you ought to make it the focus of your life to do whatever you can practically to reduce the rate of sinning.
Yeah, I've always said that um like a lot of people, especially like people like my age and like the young folk will leave religion and Christianity um because um they view it as like harming like gay and trans people. And it's like I don't think Christianity or like Mormonism or like anything like that is bad because it harms gay people. I think it's bad because it's untrue and it harms gay people. Um
Yeah, it has to be premised on maybe not everything about Christianity being untrue, but it has to be premised on the idea that God will punish sexual deviance with hell being untrue. Because if it were true, if it were even like 1% chance that it were true, then the worldly harm to gay and trans people would not begin to compare to the suffering in hell. But then that touches on Pascal's wager, right? Because somebody could just claim like, whoa, however bad you thought hell would be, hell's like a Googleplex times worse. And then, okay. So then, like, then no amount of worldly, like, the most extreme worldly torture could not compare to to hell. So you've got to at some point be able to say like, um, the more extreme claim about the downside that this person is making makes me reject belief in it more extremely. I mean, this is just a general fact of what you have to do with Pascal's wager, right? You have to say, like, if somebody's like, if I'm like, hey, Jerome, if you don't agree to give me all the money you earn for the rest of your life, then there's a
Pascal's
being.
mugging.
Pascal's mugging, yeah. And there's a
Yeah.
being that will torture you in the afterlife, and then you say, well, my credence in what you're saying, Jeremy, is only like 1 in a trillion, so I'm not going to do it. And then I revise my claim and say, oh, but this being is going to torture you like a sextillion times as much as anybody has ever been tortured. So that's greater than it's much greater than your 1 in a trillion doubt. you know, uh, you got you got to be able to like update your skepticism in proportion to the increase in the claim that somebody's making, right? And so that's
Yeah. And you also have to look at it like relative to other claims too. Right, like in the hell example, it's like
oh
you could
yeah,
say 1% true, like it's like 1% chance that Christianity is true and like Christianity where there's eternal hellfire, but maybe there's like a 5% chance that like AI takes over the world and puts us in eternal bliss, right? So it's like
should there be more? Should there be more of us LGBT allies um, promoting the idea that um, the divine being will torture you for eternity if you don't support LGBT rights? Just offset it. An offsetting pal smugging. Yeah,
I, yeah, I mean, in a way, I mean, you kind of can do that. Like once it gets so extreme, like once it gets so unlikely, you get into this like 0.5% chance of it being true, whatever. Yeah, you can just start saying making up really any claim.
yeah, instead of hell, there's this place called Shemel, and it's a Googleplex times worse than hell. And it's Graham's number times worse than hell. And that's where you'll go if you don't oppose the Catholic Church's doctrine on homosexuality.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, mugging the muggers. Um, I think it's ultimately going to come down to a claim, like a verbal claim about either extreme probabilities or extreme magnitudes of happiness or suffering, um, not being equivalent to actual evidence of extreme probabilities or extreme magnitudes, which makes sense. It makes sense because you think about children going like, "I hate you a million times," and then somebody's like, "I hate you a trillion times. I hate you infinity times. I hate you infinity plus one times." Okay, so they don't understand the math. They're not talking about math. They're just doing some kind of verbal jousting. Um, just verbally invoking a larger magnitude and magnitude of the effect or magnitude and probabilities. It's just like we should just treat those things as a speech act that is detached from the what seems to be the literal content, right? People,
Yeah.
especially non-consequentialists, but even like kind of sloppy consequentialists will say things like, uh, well, the famous example of like, torture, one child being tortured to death versus a certain number of stub toes. And it's easy to say that one child being tortured to death is worse than 100 stub toes. That's really easy because we know what 100 is. But then people start saying that one child being tortured to death is worse than a Googleplex stub toes. You just gotta Googleplex squared. Yeah. Um, you just gotta doubt that. You just gotta say like, there's no way that this person understands what Googleplex means.
Yeah, it's like that
Right.
thing of like people don't know how big a billion is. Um,
I mean, yeah. You got to say you can verbally claim that a Googleplex stub toes is worse than one child being tortured to death, but you can't actually feel it. You can't actually believe it. You can make this sentence and say that claim, but it's impossible to like actually believe it in the real sense of belief. You can't orient your actions and feelings around it because your actions and your feelings cannot process a Googleplex. So we shouldn't take that verbal claim seriously at all. I'm not saying it's obviously false, even though it is obviously false. I'm saying I'm saying the person saying it can't actually be believing it. Um,
So just to be like clear, so you're talking about just like um believing like the extreme like number and like not being able to understand like how big Googleplex is and like full having a full belief of that. But someone could definitely have a belief that like having a large amount of um small amounts of suffering can add up to a greater amount of suffering than one large amount of suffering. Um like the people stubbing their it could be the case that you have a bunch of people stubbing their toes or getting death specks in their eyes is worse than one person being tortured just on like the sheer level of scale.
Yeah.
um
So I'm just saying that I agree. You're saying that if I'm saying that P is impossible for somebody to really believe, then not P must be impossible for somebody to really believe. And you're saying not P is definitely something that people could reasonably believe. Um, yeah, I agree with you in this case. People who say that a Googleplex small harms are greater than are worse, much worse than one example of a very large harm that we can understand. Um, those just are the people who understand the size of Googleplex. Yeah, that's that's sort of all that it's measuring. All that it's measuring. It's not capable of measuring like how bad people feel about stubbed toes versus how bad people feel about uh, children tortured to death. The only thing that it's measuring is whether this particular person has some appreciation for the size of super large numbers or not. Um,
yeah, I mean possibly. I mean they could understand they could actually understand um the scale of numbers, but then just have different values.
um, you mean different consequentialist weightings,
Yeah.
or you mean okay? So you don't mean somebody who rejects consequentialism and has like is like a deontologist and thinks that any rule violation is what makes something wrong. So you're okay. You're talking within consequentialism, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I guess it's mathematically possible that you could be a consequentialist and it uses infinite like degrees of hyper infinity in its value system, right? And you could think that there's certain kinds of torture that just use some degree of infinity in their multiplier that would still be consequentialist. Um, I mean, it's perfectly like capable of mathematical modeling um, to say that whatever kind of torture you're thinking about is multiplied by some infinite value, so that, and stub toes are only multiplied by some finite value. So it's impossible for any finite number of stub toes to become larger than one example of torture. Um, yeah, I guess, I mean, that's logically coherent, but the argument against it is usually this stepwise comparison of how many stub toes are equal to like one broken pinky finger, how many broken pinky fingers are equal to one broken arm, how many broken arms are equal to one kidney stone. Yeah, and then you go on,
Yeah.
and every time there's a finite multiplier. To where when you get to like one child being tortured, at one, infant or whatever, one young child being tortured to death, unless people are willing to make an infinite jump at any one of those points, like, is it better for one child to be tortured to death than a million young children to die from cancer? Unless people are willing to make that infinite jump at any one of those like incremental comparisons that somebody can make, I think that that defense is going to get refuted. There has to be, if there's going to be an infinite difference between stub toes and being tortured to death, then there's got to be an infinite leap at some point along the increments, right?
Yeah.
And that seems pretty extremely implausible. Like, if
I
you don't,
just I know, like, in my experience, like, when I do that whole thing, it's like, what's worse, stubbing a toe, or so, um, should you, torture one person with, like, 100 level suffering, or torture 2 people and each of them have a level suffering of, like, 80? Um, it's like it's better to torture the one person at 100 than the 2 80s at 160. Um, and then as I continue, like, down that road, there's at no point do I say, like, "Oh, like, it's better to cause the the larger amount of suffering on that scale," um, where I eventually do just end up into the where it's better to stub, it's worse to have stub toes than it is to on a large mass scale than it is to have one person being tortured.
yeah, I mean, that's the relationship between the finite and the infinite is that no number of finite gaps can multiply to an infinite gap. So there has to be an infinite gap, an infinite moral gap at some point along the chain. Um, it seems just like linguistically, like when you're lazy and you don't really like understand math or like think about it very hard, it seems like an easy linguistic thing to say that one person being tortured to death is infinitely worse than any number of stubbed toes. But um, you know, when you start producing these increments, it's impossible, it seems, to find any plausible place where an infinite gap occurs.
So yeah, if you have to choose between having 1 in a googolplex chance of being tortured to death versus 1 in a million chance of having chapped lips, you're better off choosing the chapped lips.
Nope. That's just profoundly ignorant of what a googolplex is. Anybody who understands what a googolplex is would disagree with that statement, Phil.
We talked
I mean,
about this a little bit, a couple
to
months
put it
ago on
in
Carson's stream.
perspective, it's it's comparable to the ratio of 100% chance that you have chapped lips for the rest of your life versus if one atom in the entire observable universe won the lottery among all the atoms, then you'd be tortured to death. But what I said, the extreme thing that I said, that is not even as extreme as what you just said. A googolplex is so much larger than the number of atoms in the observable universe that I mean, just a Google is larger than the number of atoms in the observable universe. And a googolplex is 10 to the power of a Google. So your chance of being tortured to death would be 0. And so it's functionally equivalent to just saying, I want chapped lips for the rest of my life for nothing.
What if we
That's
said what Phil is saying here, but we just changed like the number so it's the same idea but more believable? Like 1 in a billion versus 1 in a million or something like that.
well,
Where there's
sure.
still
Well, yeah. I mean, so then the ratio is one to 1,000. Chapped lips for the rest of your life versus 1 in 1,000 chance of being tortured to death right now. I mean, yeah, that's a reasonable ratio. Yeah.
wait, Phil. You what's your what correction did you make? He's saying please mention his correction, but I don't know what he's talking about. Is it in the same comment? Oh, well, yeah, I'm not sure what Phil's talking about there, but that's it's a fun topic for sure. The people's understanding of numbers and scales and probabilities and possibilities and stuff like that.
Yeah,
It's fun.
when it comes to our ethical decisions, I mean, I think Pascal's mugging is a really crucial concept. It's um, the basic insight of Pascal's mugging is that our our degree of skepticism of a claim um, can't be a constant, because if your degree of skepticism of somebody's claim is any finite constant, then they can always override it by claiming that the badness of the result would be some super large number larger, right? So I mean, anything, just anything that comes up in the world, somebody could just claim like, you're going to be, if you don't give this particular thing to me, help me with this particular thing, then it's going to harm you. And if you say I don't think so, then they just go to Googleplex and they go to Graham's number and they go to tree 3. Tree 3 is just an insanely large number. And then tree 3, you go to like tree of parentheses tree 3, right? That's how much suffering you're going to experience if you don't help me move this Saturday.
I should start using that.
Even if you're like, I am virtually certain that you're full of shit. Are you tree parentheses tree 3 certain? No. So we have to have our credence in another person's claim be scalable, be proportionate to the absurdly large probability that they're claiming to associate with that belief, right? That has to be how our reaction to like somebody else's numerical or probability claim is, in order to be rational and not constantly be Pascal's mugging each other all the time. Yeah. it's the same childishness as the playground. I hate you infinity. I hate you infinity times 2 or whatever.
Do you know who Synth is?
No.
She's a streamer in like the, I guess, like vegan philosophy / politics / debate community. She doesn't really do much these days as much as she used to, but she's like been, she's talked with like Vosh and Destiny and all those people, but she she actually got money out of Pascal's mugging. Like she got someone to pay her. I forgot how much it was. It wasn't a lot. It was like $200 or something like that. But she got some money out of. She pulled off Pascal's mugging. Yeah.
What number did she claim? Did she just say I'm sure, or did she say like?
I don't remember. It was a pretty high number.
Infinite, or did she say like?
It would take me a minute to look it up, but
trillion.
No, it was like
a trillion times. If you don't give me $100, you'll be tortured a trillion times more than Hitler is tortured in hell.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So, yeah, this is a good thing to bring up. Something I talked about with with my best friend Scott, and some other people is in terms of like consequentialism and shocking people or whatever. This science fiction like comic where there's this guy who's a hero regularly saving like billions or trillions of people on different planets or different systems, and then it's revealed that he's Hitler. Hitler's been kept alive and like physically granted immortality, and so this guy who's like this main force of regularly saving trillions of people is the same guy who killed millions of innocent people. And so bringing up this conflict, right? Could any number of people exceeding the people that he is responsible for killing by some astronomical amount make him a net good person? So that's a story that would drive so many people insane, piss so many people off. Just the idea that it's illogically conceivable for Hitler, if he was able to stay alive and choose to take these actions that save trillions of people, to become not only redeemed, right, but the best person who had ever existed.
Yeah.
Right. That's that's the kind of troll or whatever, but it seems logical, you know. If there's only one person whose net actions, the net effect of their actions was to save, you know, whatever 100 quintillion people, and then a long time ago he killed tens of millions of people, then that would be the best person who ever existed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking, I mean, the scalar consequentialist argument is like, this is somewhat different from Norcross's phrasing. This is what used to be my phrasing. So I'll kind of use my old phrasing rather than Elster Norcross's. But you know who Norman Borlaug is?
No.
He's called the founder of the Green Revolution. He's a agricultural scientist who developed strains of grains and various crops that allowed them to be grown much more efficiently and introduced them to Africa and other parts of the world. And many people credit him for saving 1 billion lives. Okay, by increasing crop yields, right? So you regularly find people saying that Norman Borlaug is like the best person who's ever lived, right? The greatest man in history. So I asked people, what if like you found out Norman Borlaug like violently sexually assaulted somebody one time, then how would the assessment of him change? Would he still be the greatest man in history minus a bit, or would it completely cancel all the greatest man in history and he would still be about as bad as any other person who had done that crime? And the problem is, if you try to say, here's one way of phrasing the problem. If you try to say that one horrifically violent sexual assault completely negated all the good of him and then brought him below neutral, then you or I, as outside observers, if somebody said, "Hey, Jerome and Jeremy, you have the option of either preventing Norman Borlaug from committing one violent sexual assault or preventing 1,000 other violent sexual assaults by committed by ordinary people," then we we should say, I would rather prevent the one because it was committed by this guy rather than the 1,000. If that were true, if it were true that him doing that bad thing brought his godlike status all the way below neutral, then you and I should prefer that one assault was prevented rather than 1,000 other people being similarly assaulted. And that's insane.
Yeah, to like prefer that 1 billion people starve to death, um, over 1,000 people getting assaulted is crazy.
So, well, just to say that this one assault would be morally worse because it changed Norman Borlaug from the best man in history to a really bad man, compared to 1,000 victims suffering exactly the same because their perpetrators didn't happen to be the founders of the Green Revolution, right? That doesn't make any sense because that's just preferring much more suffering. Um, so the only coherent thing to say is that even if Norman Borlaug had, violently sexually assaulted one person one time, he would still be a candidate for the best person who would ever live. And then that's, that so that relates to my you know imaginary story about Hitler continuing to survive. And there's got to be some number, whatever it is, however large it is, there's got to be some number that if Hitler's life had been preserved and he saved that many people in the galaxy, he would become the best person who ever existed. And the only question is what that number is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it does. at least to me, it seems obviously true that there is a number out there. But
Yeah, uh, and and you can you can acknowledge that fact while still saying that, you know, in the real world, he died, and the legacy he left is one of the worst legacies of anyone who's ever lived, right?
yeah,
As a matter of fact, um, that's somebody who says that. Well, I mean, there's all different versions of that. I mean, there's there's people who don't want to put a ratio on how much worse was Hitler than Ted Bundy, because they think if you put any number on it, then you're saying that Ted Bundy, raping and killing many women was kind of okay, which is not what not what you'd be saying at all. You'd just be saying that like the negative impact of Hitler was just vastly vastly worse than the negative impact of Bundy, right?
yeah. I mean, it also kind of works in the other way too, where you're trying to give value to people. You know, if you're trying to like argue for veganism, like people all the time are like, well, humans aren't the same as like animals aren't the same as humans. It's
Mhm.
like we're not. It's like we're not trying to bring humans down. We're bringing animals up.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And then, but then in terms of veganism, uh, what's bigger, Jerome? The difference between an average non-vegan who doesn't do any activism and an average vegan who doesn't do any activism, or between the vegan who doesn't do any activism and Earthling Ed? What's the bigger gap?
I mean, you could. Uh, there's a world where the Earthling Ed has a bigger gap. That is a world that exists. Um, but I think for most people, the gap would be the other way.
So in terms of the overall impact on the world.
Yeah, I mean the person who the vegan who doesn't do any activism compared to the non-vegan who doesn't do any activism. Was that the or am I confusing it?
Yeah, so
Yes.
that has a certain increment of moral progress, but then how does that increment compare to the increment between you or me and Ed Winters? The amount of good that he's done for the world relative to us is huge compared to the amount of good that you or I have done by personally not consuming animal products.
Uh, that might be true. I don't have a strong it's possible that it's true. But I think just by simply cutting out animal products, you do a ton of good, and I think
You do,
the
but
scale between someone who's not
now
um
it would only be our fault if we had the aptitude to be another Earthling Ed, right? Like the much huger amount of good that he has done for animals relative to us, it would only be something that we could be morally accountable for if we could have been just like him and had just as much impact as him.
oh, gotcha. Okay. I
It's
see what you're
plausible
saying
that we
then.
can't, so we're not. we're not culpable for that if we don't have whatever natural gifts or chance role in the world that we could have been him, right? Another an extra version of him. But still, um, he his influence on the world is worth many many times more than one person quietly going vegan, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the scale consequentialist thing of it always being good to do more. There's not this threshold that you cross where you you stop doing the bad thing until you become you become clear, become a good person. Um, that's not how things work. You can anytime you can improve the world by greater amounts, and that's a good thing you can do. And people who have the any sort of ability to improve the world by a large amount um, are basically the most important people to have in our societies, right? Um, it's kind of strange. It's like yeah, I mean, I honestly I can think about these thought experiments that um, somebody might challenge a consequentialist with. So I'll ask you this: is like um, you have the option, Jerome, of bringing a child into the world that completely cares about the animals, like very deeply, um, like to their core. Oh, that's not me. Um, so you could bring somebody into the world just like the deepest feeling person, but they're they're very unattractive and they're not neurotypical, and so their influence beyond themselves is minimal. Or you could bring somebody into the world who mostly really cares about the animals, enough to be vegan, not quite as deeply, maybe 80% as deeply, but they're extremely physically attractive and charming and musically talented, and they can become a star and have enormous reach of their influence. Um, as a consequentialist vegan, which one of those two would you prefer to bring into the world?
The one with more reach. And you can even go further. You can even say something like he doesn't care about the animals, like he's just some psychopath or whatever, but for whatever reason you know, he like maybe pretends to care to like stroke his ego or whatever. But the consequence of the reach of him like, you know, being an activist in the movement and
That's the
increasing
yeah, that's the upside of
well-being and
Mother Night,
yeah,
right? That's the
yeah.
upside of Mother Night. In Mother Night, there's a guy who is, I guess, a good person, but pretends to be a bad person and causes a lot of harm. Yeah, so the opposite side is if you're a bad person but successfully pretend to be a good person and cause a lot of benefit to the world, then that's good. We are what we
Yeah.
pretend to be, so we must be very careful about what we pretend to be. It doesn't only work in the negative direction, you know. It can work in the positive direction. Uh, Even if we happen to be bad people, the more we pretend to be good people, the more good we're doing, right? Yeah. Um, yeah. So you're giving the right answers. I mean, how many vegan activists do you think are going to give that same answer?
Um, a good amount, but not the majority. I think most, at least maybe like my Twitter is skewed or something, but I think from what I see, most like vegan activists have this like brain rot of like deontological thinking.
You think they, like, even at the very extreme level, you think they would say, um, I snap my fingers can bring 100% morally committed but very shy personal vegan into existence rather than 98%, you know, um, 98% committed superstar musical artist who's gonna cause thousands of people to shift to veganism.
Yeah, I think there's a scary amount that would not choose the star. Yeah. It's depressing, but I think it's true.
And then how do you describe them, like we're supposed to be vegan for the animals. That's an expression. So somebody who would make that choice, are they what, are they not for the animals? Or are they somebody would make the choice to not to prefer that, like, that more perfected but shy and uninfluential person rather than that superstar. It's obviously causing a more negative impact on the animals. So
Yeah.
would you just straightforwardly say that that choice is not for the animals?
Uh, well, I don't think I would just simply because it's bad optics, but in a if I'm just talking with friends or something who are all already vegan, yeah, I think they're not vegan for the animals, yeah.
If you're vegan for the animals, then you want the people to be in the world that have the best ultimate outcome for the animals, right?
Yeah.
And so um, and practically you don't focus your attention upon Joaquin Phoenix being in films where horses are ridden, right? Uh, unless unless you think it would be easy to get him to change on that issue, like very easy. When you weigh his like Golden Globe speech against animal industries, against his being in films where he rides horses. You still end up considering him a much larger asset than some uninfluential person who is more purist in their personal behavior, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
We still wish if there were like 100 Joaquin Phoenixes, then that would be ultimately much better than if there were 1,000 more shy, personal, strict vegans. Because our goal is to most effectively, most quickly change the entire society. But then that's why I like my Hitler comic book, like sci-fi concept, because it really puts people's feet to the fire on that. If he had survived, is there some number of people out in the galaxy that he could have saved that would have made him not only somebody who's constantly atoning for his evil, but ultimately on balance make him the greatest hero that there's ever been. I think a consequentialist has to say yes.
Sometimes I worry that I have my first and my last name on the internet when we say things that like about how like Hitler could be the most moral person in the world.
I mean, he's in reality, he's dead. That's not going to happen. But conceivably, yeah, that consequentialism implies that the worst person could become the best person if the horrific harm that they caused ended up being offset by some number multiplier greater benefit that they caused later.
What do you think of the idea of like someone who eats animal products, but every time he eats animal products, he just donates to an effective charity? So he's like, "Oh, I'm craving some pizza right now." So they go and they buy some some pepperoni pizza, and then they spend $200 or whatever on
I heard
an effective charity.
that's basically what the consequentialist and ex-vegan psychologist Diana Fleischman does. I think she basically is vegan when she's at home, but when she goes on trips, when she's in China or something, doesn't really look for plant-based products, but make some kind of donation to offset the animal products that she's eating. I think on the first level of analysis, it's correct that your donations can do more good than your personal consumption behaviors do bad. but I think on a higher level, uh, it's really lazy and short sighted, and I think that because um, most of the problems, mo- almost all of the obstacles to being vegan are network effects. Almost nothing is hard about being vegan except for the fact that not many other people are vegan.
Yeah.
So if you um, like other things, other moral things, okay, don't donating to charities um, to help the poorest humans or trying to eradicate diseases, like those things are very important, very good, but they experience diminishing marginal utility. So the more you do them, you solve the easiest problems, and then the other problems get harder and more expensive. But when it comes to veganism, almost all of the difficulty is just the fact that there aren't that many other people who believe it. So somebody who tries to offset eating animal products by making a donation, they're missing the fact that changing more and more of the world to not consuming animal products makes it easier and cheaper for more and more people to do the same thing. It's like a moral, extremely low hanging fruit. You know, the more restaurants, the more stores, the more um, house parties we make vegan, the cheaper and easier in a social sense it becomes for more and more people to join that. So the offsetting, the concept of offsetting, the concept that I'm going to eat a steak and then I'm going to make a donation, it's it's deeply ignorant in the sense that um,
The
that your
cost is
donation, yeah, your
yeah, the
donation
cost is
can't possibly
go ahead.
compare to how much good you can do by normalizing not eating steaks. Um, because it's almost costless. It's almost costless to um to de- decrease the negative network effects. If you can if you can increase the chance that when a group of people goes out in a major city, um, they by default go to a vegan restaurant because some of them are vegans and the others are people who are comfortable eating at a vegan restaurant, then the good that you're doing there is, it just so much outweighs the good that most people can do with their donations by going to a animal eating restaurant eating animals, normalizing eating animals, and then donating some amount of money to offset that, I don't think it can possibly compare it to um, what you can do by normalizing not eating animals in terms of the network effects. Um,
Yeah, I agree.
and if somebody is, and I'm not gonna say that somebody making that donation to the animal charity, I'm not gonna say that their donation itself is bad. I'm not gonna say, fuck you, hypocrite, don't even make that donation, because the donation is still good.
Yeah.
But you're still obviously making a mistake. And maybe there's some part of my mind that thinks that, like, there's some tiny, tiny, tiny skepticism. It's like, maybe this person just, like, loves eating animal flesh, like, way more than I ever did. Um, and then, okay, I guess they should do it and make a donation to offset. But um,
Yeah, that's one of those things where it's like, I can kind of get it, but I don't believe you.
I don't believe you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and as an aphantasic who, I have to ultimately believe that you have this crazy way of of thinking that I can't even begin to relate to. Um, yeah, maybe somebody has this exquisite taste reaction to specific animal flesh, but mm, yeah, I'm highly dubious. I just think, yeah, what can you say to that except no, you don't. I was just listening to, what was it? I was lifting vegan logic, ultimately saying, like, the response to somebody saying, like, bacon though, like, bacon, real bacon is so amazing, like, it outweighs all of this suffering. And he's saying, like, the ultimate thing you have to say is no, no, it doesn't. No, no, it doesn't taste that good to you. You know, you don't have to say there's no logical amount of taste that could possibly outweigh a pig's suffering. You just have to say, no, I don't think your pleasure at that piece of bacon is as big as you seem to be saying it is. Um,
Yeah, and that's the entire vegan argument in a nutshell, right? Our taste pleasure fails in comparison to the animal suffering, and that's kind of just case closed. That's it.
and it's especially strong when you used to consume all those animal products for much of your life, and so you have this personal experience, like, you know what bacon used to taste like,
Yeah.
and you and I fucking know that it was never some, like, transcendent, Googleplex times pleasure than any other pleasure we have in life. Um, it was just like, oh, kind of good thing, kind of like smallish amount of pleasure,
You forget about the next day.
You quickly forget about. You don't even remember what you had to eat the previous day's meal. Yeah, so we know that they're full of shit. We know what kind of degree that pleasure is, and we don't. You don't have this like knockdown logical argument that the person you're dealing with isn't this extreme outlier that has this utterly intense uh, pleasure at this particular product. Um, I mean,
They're
you
like in
you
this
can't.
ecstasy coma, just foaming at the mouth, and like
You can still kind of test it by when they're these vegan alternatives and they can't tell the difference until they're informed. Um, that makes it that really underscores the fact that it was never about this extreme difference in personal pleasure to begin with. It was always about social conformity. Um,
yeah. I like that video of There's a video of Glenn Beck eating an Impossible Burger.
mhm.
Mister, conservative hee haw yee haw with the cowboy hat. Um, he's eating it. They're like comparing like the Impossible Burger to like a real burger, and he thought the Impossible Burger was the real thing. Um, and like that's the one that he voted on. He's like, this one's the real one. It's like, and this is coming from Mister Conservative Fox News hee haw yee haw cowboy hat wearing Glenn Beck.
Yeah, I mean that's what we don't. You don't actually need these substitutes. Um, a lot of old vegans are saying this. I mean, Boca burgers are good. Uh,
Cheaper too. Well,
yeah,
sometimes Beyond's on sale, but the
but
Bocas are
you know,
cheaper. Yeah,
you you start getting as much taste pleasure out of the good things that you're consuming as you did before. I mean, tastes adapt. So, I'm kind of on the fence because I like these new substitutes that are really really accurate, really similar to animal products. Um, I like the people they can bring in, um, and I don't have any desire to be like an old school purist and say those are only for transitional periods, and then ultimately you should end up like eating like chickpeas and lentils. That's ridiculous, um, but they do end up exposing the the bad faith of the people who say, my personal taste preferences are really extreme and they outweigh the other considerations.
yeah,
Um,
like that 10%, 20% taste difference is like,
yeah, because if you can't even prove your taste difference in a blind taste test, then it's non-existent. Then it's all about your ideology. Um, so laying that on the line. Um,
yeah. One bad thing about veganism is you kind of start to, at least from for me, like it's kind of a little bit sad because I start to view people that I in the past would have seen as like good people as like on the scale of things bad people. Um like like in the same way that I'm sure like a lot of plantation owners were like really good to white people. Really good people and like people you would look up to like white people, but when it comes to black people,
Yeah.
they're
Well,
not one of us, you know.
and
And then
and
in the same
and
way, there's
and
people
really good to
that
some black
oh, go
people,
ahead.
right? And really good to white people, and really good to some black people. Just like carnists are really good to their pet dogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
A
There's
few of
so many
them.
people. Yeah, there's so many people that are just super outstanding, like good people when it comes to other people. But the unfortunate thing is like people aren't the only individuals that exist on this planet, and uh, when it comes to animals, there's a lot of people that are actually just like very bad people, and that's a really hard thing to um come to realize. At least for me, it's like a lot of these people that seem very good, uh, who like refuse to like not even just go vegan, but like even just reduce their animal consumption or like it's like these people are like comparable to like those who didn't want to like abolish slavery or like fought against the abolition of slavery.
Yeah,
And that's a tough pill to swallow for sure.
I was watching this show with my sister called Dark Tourism, and so this guy like goes around. Some of the places he goes to are like former like Holocaust sites, right? Like in Indonesia. Um, but then one of the places he went to is like this part of Africa where voodoo is practiced. So there's a lot of like these religious animal sacrifices, and then they keep the heads. There's like this market stall with all these heads of different animals that people purchase for different like voodoo rituals, right? It's like the horse head, like if you bury like some hair that comes from your enemy with a horse head, then it will like curse them. If you if you buy a duck head and then you like speak the name of your rival into the duck head, then it will like silence their malicious voice or this sort of thing. So we've got this stall with all these animal heads, and then they also do a lot of like ritual headings of animals. So like starting to watch this with my sister, and like she can't watch it at all. She's like having to like fast forward through all of this and saying how horrible it is, and she's like she knows my reaction. So she's saying like I know that I'm a hypocrite for not being able to watch this, and so yeah, a large part of this is um it's not just dealing with people who are like callous um when it comes to violence and death, but people who are very sensitive to it, but are paying for it, are causing it, but are blocking themselves out from looking at it.
Yeah.
Um,
There's definitely a big difference there between the people, I think. Um, I think, well, Phil's a perfect example. Like Phil is very, very understanding of the arguments for veganism, right? But um has a very hard time socially um sticking to it. And I know I have a lot of personal like friends and acquaintances and people that I know that are just like Phil or just like your sister. Um
It's
what
different
really
when you're married, though. Huh?
yeah.
Yeah, when you have this tight connection to somebody, um, you and I are single. Um, you, I guess, still have a pretty good chance of getting with another vegan into a relationship. I I have to confront the fact that it's increasingly less likely, that I'll ever have a relationship at 47 years old when I'm additionally restricting myself by knowing that I won't be in a relationship with a carnist. Um, that's okay. I can be I can be alone in that sense. I won't really be alone. I have friends, I have movements, but imposing that large additional restriction on potential romantic relationships I might have, um, it's hard, but it's not nearly as hard as trying to deal with trying to be a moral minority when you're already in a relationship, when you already have a wife and a son.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Um, Ultimately, we know what the moral criteria are, what the moral path is, and then it just becomes a matter of tactics. And I think that if you were within a local community and you had like a kid who seemed to really like intuitively care about animals a lot and was wanting to go vegan, just about the best thing you could do is to go and have like a personal interaction with his parents and show them, that they can be vegan too, and like explain to them the impact that their habits will have on their kid, and try to get the whole family unit to be on the same page. That would be my strategy, my approach to that sort of situation. Um, it's not always going to work,
Yeah.
but I wish I could have a one-on-one conversation with Phil's wife.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But yeah, I think one of the most like evil things you can say and well, it's one thing to say it as just like a thing that people say, and there's another thing to say it and mean it. And that's like the whole like I'll never go vegan. Um, and the sad thing is that a lot of people say that and they mean it too. Um,
Yeah. There's the question of whether they mean it, and then there's the question of whether it's true.
oh, that's true. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's pretty bad to say something like that and mean it. Um, but yeah, maybe sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not true. Um,
I guess that's why it's so important to try and get like legal protections.
yeah, I mean, if you look at what we're seeing right now with marijuana in the U.S. Uh, it's just become abundantly clear that there were many people who strongly opposed this thing when it was illegal. And when it was illegal, they thought that it was dangerous. And then almost as soon as it became fully legal, they tried it, liked it, and are now fully in favor of it.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
so it's like it's not the case that there's this fundamental conflict between. I mean, you can see with alcohol too. There's not there's not primarily a conflict between people who are like against intoxicants and people who are in favor of it. That's a minor conflict. The major conflict is between people who derive most of their moral values from what's currently legal and and morally sanctioned, and people who derive their moral values from some kind of abstract ethical or religious principle. That's the major distinction. And there's a lot more of the former type of people. There's a lot more people who, once something becomes normalized and legal, will be very quick to accept it. Uh, so that's what's going on with like dog meat, right? You know, most people in the U.S. they don't oppose eating dogs because they have some like profound moral principle that thinks that dogs are special. You know, they oppose eating dogs because normal people don't eat dogs. They oppose eating dogs because buying dog meat at their supermarket is illegal. They oppose eating dogs because it's not legally sanctioned. It's not socially sanctioned. It's what weird people do. Yeah, they're normal good people. That's not what good people do. You know, and um, moral progress pretty clearly moral progress does not consist in uh, more people becoming morally brave. Uh, the difference between the time when women voting was not acceptable to today when it's taken for granted, it that change did not involve uh, many more people becoming Mary Wollstonecrafts, like intellectually um, rigorous, you know, morally brave people. That's not what happened. What happened is it used to be the case that the lazy conformist thing to believe was that, of course, women should not be voting. To today, the lazy conformist thing to believe is that, of course, women should be voting. Most people were lazy and lazy conformist cowards back then. Most people are lazy conformist cowards today. The thing that happened is that the definition of what a lazy conformist coward believes changed from then until now. So unless there's some kind of genetic engineering, um, there aren't going to be more brave, morally principled people in a vegan future. What there's going to be is a change in what the lazy conformist people do.
Is the soccer mom still gonna buy her pork chops for dinner? They're just gonna be lab grown, or they're gonna be made from plants.
Lab grown or plant based. What lazy conformist people eat pigs and chickens and not dogs and not dolphins today, 30 years from now, if veganism succeeds, it's not going to be that most people are not lazy and conformist. It's going to be that the lazy conformist people buy plant-based products, and only really weird people would still think of buying something from a pig or a chicken. So it's not going to be a change in the fundamental distribution of sort of moral personality traits across humanity. It's going to be a realignment of those personality traits to particular behaviors, because that's what we've observed in the past. The same people who were aggressively against interracial marriage in 1960, the same personality types were generally supportive in 1990. They were generally supportive of interracial marriage, but completely against same-sex marriage. The underlying personality psychology didn't change, but the way that the personality psychology mapped onto specific issues.
I guess that kind of goes back to how important what we were talking about, like offsetting our harm when you buy you can like buy animal products and then offset it by donating to charity. It's like the amount of good you do by increasing the movement forward of like a society that's more vegan welcoming is like has way higher
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess I would say, if somebody is purchasing animal products very privately and then donating to charity, that offsetting is very different from if they're very publicly consuming the animal products. and then
Yeah.
donate to charity, because the public consumption is normalizing this practice, and most of the people who are affected by that normalizing behavior are they're going to keep doing it too, but then they're not even donating, you know. So yeah, I believe that the changes you can bring about through your public influence is usually going to be much greater than what you do personally, unless you're enormously wealthy. And and then you gotta employ the speciesist test, right? Like, if you're gonna say, okay, somebody normalizing eating steak at a steak restaurant is gonna be okay because they donate to animal charities. Um, then you should be willing to say that, even if Bill Clinton went to Jeffrey Epstein's island and raped 13-year-old girls, um, he's still overall a good influence because he supported, you know, supported feminist policies in Congress, right? Because his political influence would have benefited many more women and girls than his personal behavior harmed. Um, maybe that's true, but it's not going to be any more or less true for the human calculation and for the non-human calculation, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, like, the argument for, like, marginal cases with Peter Singer or, like, name the trait with ask yourself is so good and common. It's because it kind of corrects your perspective. It's like, do you really believe this? Here's a similar context with the same consequences or whatever.
Well, Jerome, it's getting close to 4 hours.
Yep. I actually I want to start dry. Like, I pretty much have to work around 4 tomorrow, so it's pretty late for me. But it was a good chat. It was good.
Uh,
I want to do these streams, start doing these streams again pretty often. So
who do you want to preview? I was going to ask you at the beginning of this for people who are just logging in, but you sounded like you have a couple other chats coming up this week. Who you got?
uh, well, actually nothing now. So I thought I was talking with this guy helping humans from TikTok on Friday, but that might be next Friday now because he has to work on Friday. So um, but yeah, I want to set up at least one other stream this week. I don't know who it's going to be with, but
Well, I hope I can talk with Travis pretty soon, and we might be able to do
yeah,
a three-way.
yeah, we can set something up.
I
Um,
like to
I'll
talk
reach.
like specifically about meta ethics. But my very limited realist view against you two with the anti-realist view. Much more like specifically philosophical. That'd be pretty nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
so Gerald Reed, I give you a bunch of recommendations, right?
yeah, yeah. Oh, shit. I'm gonna start with Slaughterhouse-Five.
All right. It's
And then
shorter than Mother Night too.
that's good. Sometimes if
Yeah,
books are too long, I just never even start them because my attention span is like, gosh, I'll just watch TikTok instead.
that's if you have a short attention span, then Slaughterhouse Five is exactly the kind of novel you want to read. It has a
Awesome,
protagonist whose attention jumps around.
awesome.
It really is Pulp Fiction before Pulp Fiction came to the movies. Uh, uh,
Fantastic. Did you see uh before we go, did you see what's his face is doing his last movie? Pulp Fiction himself is doing his last movie.
what, Tarantino?
Yeah, Quentin Tarantino.
He said this will be his last film.
Yeah, his
Oh,
next movie is his last
okay,
movie. But we know how that goes. People say that all the time, and then
sure.
it's my last film, and then
And then what's he gonna do after
yeah,
that? Write
I
novels?
guess I don't know.
I mean, maybe if he said he was gonna change over to some other form of artistic expression, fine. But if he's like, I'm just gonna be just like an ordinary guy for the rest of my life, I would kind of doubt that very highly.
Well, his thing was that he's worried about becoming one of those people where like uh someone like Paul McCartney, where he was like arguably the greatest songwriter of all time, and then now like he's still like releasing music, but it's like dog shit.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I guess that's true.
he just doesn't want to
But
be one of those.
I I think McCartney was writing great stuff until the 2000s. So uh, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's lots of examples of that. Paul Simon, Billy Joel, they all sort of trailed off, but they all produced like some amazing stuff that was 20 years after their peak.
Yeah,
And yet they, they're not producing great stuff 40 years after their peak, but you know, but how much should we care about that? I don't think I don't think that's really an argument for going out on your peak. If Paul McCartney had gone out at his peak, then we would have missed out on many amazing songs. I think maybe they're not extremely famous, but uh, yeah, yeah. We should we should talk about poetry and songwriting and lyrics sometime.
oh for sure.
We talked about it in some comments how much I think Paul McCartney was a much greater lyricist than John Lennon, and John Lennon's solo work is almost unlistenable, and how much I hate the song Imagine. uh, uh,
You're not the only one. There's a lot of haters of Imagine,
oh God.
the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah, partly it's partly because of the content, but it's more because of the lyrics, like poor poetic quality. Um, and you know, we're winding down. Okay, it's not 4 hours yet, so let's keep talking. When I was a kid, when I was growing up, um, Billy Joel and Elton John would typically be mentioned in the same sentence, right? In the same conversation.
Yeah.
And and they're both very talented pianists, and singers, I guess composers, but I could never understand it because Billy Joel is an S tier lyricist, and Elton John, despite having another guy write his lyrics, the lyrics were pretty terrible. So, uh, they weren't even in the same category. Like I could listen to some Elton John songs and and be entertained, but Billy Joel is writing this amazing poetry, and Bernie Taupin for Elton John is writing these lyrics that I'm just going like, what is this? Like, what is this nonsense? Like, it doesn't have any, it doesn't have any like poetic skill to it. It's just like words accompanying this music, and my friends growing up in adolescence and adulthood, they didn't get that. They didn't like they got how catchy Billy Joel's music was, but they didn't get what a brilliant poet he was. And what the difference was, what that contrast was with a lot of other artists. And it's sad for me because I'm a very very verbal person steeped in poetry, and I feel like poetry is really dead. It's really a dead art. Um, People talk about popular music in terms of genres, and then they don't. Generally, music people don't have any sense of distinction between people within a genre that have good good poetics versus terrible poetics, whether it's metal or punk or kind of synth pop or folk or whatever,
The
across the
cl-
genres. I like some
the cl-
artists because their poetics are great, and I have no interest in other artists because their poetics are terrible.
the closest you can get to someone I think um that like cares about lyrics is like with like rap. And those lyrics are often like I don't know,
Yeah.
not always the best, but
So
I think
I
that's like
usually
the
say
last.
I like rap, but I don't necessarily like hip hop because whenever
Oh
I
yeah,
like
yeah.
hip hop, it's because of the MC. It's because the rapper has strings together amazing lyrics, and when it's somebody like or somebody like Jay Z, he's like really famous, I guess, for stringing the beats and the soundscape together or whatever. But I just don't think his lyrics are very good at all. Um, so yeah, I love Eminem. I like MF Doom. I like Logic. I like rappers that have like really clever, awesome poetic lyrics. But there are a lot of very Kanye. You know, I, God damn. My 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 impression of Kanye is like this. The way I rap is that I start with one sentence. Can't think of something, so I say the same sentence. Got nothing. Yes, why? Another one. Ain't got nothing else, so I repeat the same sentence. Takes me a rhyme. Takes me a while before I rhyme even attempted. That's how I roll, so you will know that I'm a best bitch.
Yeah, that's Kanye.
He repeats the same. He repeats the same rhyme so much. There's all these flat rhymes, and there's no like internal rhymes. Like if you compare it to Eminem, where he's doing all these like internal like sound pattern rhymes within each bar, you know, Eminem is a goddamn genius, and Kanye is a just a ridiculous poser. I don't know.
I like I like Kanye, but not because of his lyrics. I like him because of his producing. But one so before hits 4, one thing I wanted to touch on with the whole music thing is like even with these genres that are supposed to be like lyric specific, like they're supposed like the main thing is supposed to be the lyrics, like so things like rap or things like country. Um they've been like bastardized like and like altered to where like the modern day version of country or like the modern day version of rap is like has it's it's not lyric focused anymore and it's just focused on uh what's
Yeah,
going to
I
get plays
understand.
on the radio or streams on.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, that's right. Blues Traveler's Hook is one of the best compositions ever, right? Jerome, do you not know
Yo,
Blues Traveler Hook?
no, is that a country song? I don't listen to country much.
No,
Blue Traveler's
Jesus
Hook. What
fucking
was it?
Christ! All right,
I don't know what this
you
is.
gotta you gotta pull up the lyrics as soon as
Blues
we get
Tra-
off here. You need to pull up that song and read the lyrics
Okay.
as you listen to it. And I don't want to spoil anything for you, but Blues Traveler is an amazingly talented group, and the song Hook. Oh God.
All right. I'll
Read
read
the
it when I'm not
lyrics.
tired.
Read the lyrics as you listen to the song.
Okay.
You'll understand what I'm talking about in terms of lyrics versus uh, popular airplay. I promise you. I don't want to spoil. I can't believe that you don't know Blues Traveler's
Yeah,
Hook.
I've no idea.
But please listen to that while reading the lyrics and experiencing what that song is, what he's doing in that song, and we'll talk about it next time. Talk about it in
All right.
chat
Sounds
because
good.
they're getting close to 4 hours.
Yep. We're about
Let's.
there. All right, I'm going to cut it. I'm going to say adios and stream up.
Auf Wiedersehen.